Good morning, Miss Daniels.
Good morning.
Are you there at home on your own?
Yes, now, yes.
And let me tell you who you're talking to here. You're talking to Fleetbank House, a large room which can, at its fullest, accommodate about 200, but in these particular times you'll understand that we only have a total of 9 people in the room. One of those is a name you'll hear from time to time, Shumik, whose job it is to make sure that you get the right document on your screen so that you can follow the question in relation to it. But and one of them is Mary, who before Miss Scott begins the questions for you, will ask you to take the affirmation. Beyond this room, though, is the main audience to whom you are talking and giving your evidence. They are the public who want to hear what you have to say, and there will be about 250 of people who are listening, at least 250 screens, and from time to time, the number will vary throughout the day, but that's the audience that you are addressing.
Okay, thank you.
Without any more ado, I'll ask Mary to administer the oath.
Right.
Please state your full name.
Susan Daniels.
And repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely.
I do solemnly, sincerely.
And truly declare and affirm.
And truly declare and affirm.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can, thanks.
So, Ms Daniels, you first became involved with the Mcfarland Trust in 1990 as an independent financial advisor, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Although I did think it was 1991, but 1990, 1991, around that time.
And you also, between about the end of 2005 and summer of 2006, undertook the role of a caseworker for the Mcfarland Trust on a self-employed basis. Is that also correct?
Yes, it is. I've always been. My career has mainly been self-employment over the last years.
And you also provided independent financial advice to registrants of the Eileen Trust, is that right?
Correct, yes.
And in February 2005, you became the Eileen Trust caseworker, first of all on a self-employed basis and later on an employed basis, is that right?
Correct. Yes, correct.
And at the end of 2007, you became the secretary for the Eileen Trust, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And you also, at that stage, began to manage the Eileen Trust investments.
Yes, with the trustees, yes.
And you discharged those roles until the Eileen Trust closed down in the end of 2017, beginning of 2018.
Correct, yes.
Have you ever provided any advice to any of the members registered with either the Skipton Fund or the Caxton Foundation?
I have had inquiries regarding life assurance for people with hepatitis C, but that's been a very few compared to the work I did with the Mcfarland and Eileen Trusts.
And have you provided any independent financial advice or other services to registrants who are registered with the new schemes in England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales that took over from the Alliance House organisations?
Yes, I have. The registrants have kept, a lot of the registrants have kept in regular touch with me for all the time I was with the charities and when the charities were no longer. So yes, I have a very good relationship with the registrants.
And you continue to provide financial advice to some of those, do you?
I do. If someone wants it, yes, I do.
And do you have an arrangement with the new schemes for payment of your fees?
No, I don't. I've always taken. I believe that with the new schemes that the registrants can ask for help with fees for financial advice, but if someone can't pay me, I will just help them.
And lastly, just in terms of the broad outline of your involvement with the Alliance House organisations and the registrants there, you also were instructed as an expert witness in the hepatitis litigation in 2001. Is that right?
Yes, I was. That wasn't really anything to do with the charities. That was totally separate from it.
And you provided an expert report and gave evidence in those proceedings?
Yes, I did, yes.
And we'll look at that a little bit later on, at that report a little bit later on. Can I take you then back to 1990, 1991, when you first became involved with the Mcfarland Trust? Shumik, can we have up, please, MACF 605_187? So this is a draft terms of reference for the financial advisor for a trustees meeting, and I think what we understand from the coding on Mcfarland Trust documents is that's from 1998.
Right.
It says background. Mcfarland Trust has been using a financial advisor to assist registrants with financial planning and mortgage arrangements since early in 1991. And Susan Daniels was originally approached by Tudor Williams because trust registrants were finding it very difficult to obtain mortgages due to their HIV status and dependence on benefits. Susan managed to negotiate a benefits-only mortgage package for registrants with Nationwide Building Society, and in the first 5 or 6 years of her involvement with Mcfarland Trust, she arranged approximately 40 mortgages for registrants and at the same time advised many on their personal finances.
Correct.
So just pausing there, at that time, were you running your own business, JTA Financial Services?
Yes, I think I was for most of it. Although when I first in 1991, I was working mainly doing mortgage broking for one main firm, John Lamb, who at that stage were in Grosvenor Gardens, but a couple of other companies had asked me to go in and do mortgage work for them. And I can't remember where I took the call, but it was just one of these events that happen in life. I took the call from Tudor Williams. I'd never heard of the Mcfarland Trust. I knew as much as the average man on the street about haemophilia and HIV, but he explained the circumstances to me. As it says in the notes that you've just brought up, the difficulty that registrants had in getting mortgages because a lot of them were on benefits. They had the additional problem that they couldn't get life assurance. And he explained that a lot of people were living in very poor housing, and that it was ridiculous because at that stage, the DWP would pay the interest on a mortgage up to £100,000 if someone was on income support and they met the criteria for getting the mortgage interest paid.
And at that time, a number of the registrants of the Mcfarland Trust had been given their capital, had received capital payments from the government, and were they looking to invest in their futures?
Well, that helped with the mortgage side of things because we now had a group of people who had their capital payments who were able to use some of that to put down as a deposit on a property. So they could move out of poor housing or inappropriate housing or move in the way that everybody might need to move, family, job, whatever. And that assisted them, yes.
And were the registrants of the Mcfarland Trust were they finding it difficult to secure mortgages?
I think at the time Tudor Williams contacted me, they were finding it impossible to secure mortgages. And it took me, as I said to you, I knew nothing about the Mcfarland Trust and the background, but it just struck a chord with me, what he told me during probably a 45-minute telephone conversation, and I took it away with me. And I just thought I'd like to do something about this. I approached many lenders. I was turned down by the majority of them, but at that stage, I did a lot of business with the Nationwide Building Society in Victoria Street, and the manager there, a lovely man, agreed with me that it would be a good thing for the Nationwide to do. And he said to me, Susie, just leave it with me. It took him about 3 months. He took it all the way up to the chief executive of the Nationwide Building Society. And he came back to me and said, yes, I've agreed it for you. They will do it subject to certain parameters. And that was basically confirmation where somebody wasn't working that the DWP would pay the interest on the mortgage.
So was this a mortgage that was available to all the infected registrants of the Mcfarland Trust, so people with haemophilia and HIV, even if they were only on benefits?
Yes, correct. It was available if they were on benefits, or obviously if they were working, the same criteria applied to them as applied to the general population. Their salary and other income would be looked at.
And were there any particular terms, can you recall, that applied to those mortgages because of?
No, it was exactly the same mortgage that you or I could have got. There were no kind of onerous conditions. It was just a straightforward mortgage.
And in the document that we looked at, it suggested that you had arranged approximately 40 of those in the first 5 or 6 years of your time with Mcfarland Trust.
Yes, I did. I had people wanted to move.
You mentioned that at the time, 1991, when you became involved with the Mcfarland Trust, another difficulty that registrants were experiencing was difficulty in getting life assurance.
Yeah.
Were you able to assist them with that?
It was impossible for them to get life assurance. The fact that they were HIV positive and that they had other health issues made it impossible. The combination of the two, I don't, in my experience, it would have been impossible to get life assurance under those circumstances. And I did do a lot of research into it through normal insurance companies. I think I even approached the Lloyd's insurance market and was flatly turned down.
Can we look now at your the expert report that you provided for the litigation in 2001? That's WITN 3598002. You can see that's the front page of your report, and at the bottom of there, it's got a date on it, 23rd of April 2001.
Yeah.
If we turn through to the penultimate page, sorry, 2 pages back.
Okay.
So that it's not signed, but is this the final copy of the report?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Yes.
And the page we just looked at was the address of the solicitors. Were you instructed by the claimant's solicitors in that litigation?
Yes, I was.
And can we turn then to page 3, I think it's going to be, of this report. Yes, which sets out your instructions. And the author's been asked to give her opinion on the prospects of obtaining various financial products for claimants affected by haemophilia and hepatitis C infection. And then if we go over the page, we see your conclusions in relation to life cover. And you set out there the different ratings that will be applied to premiums dependent on whether somebody has mild, moderate, severe or very severe haemophilia. you conclude, for example, in relation to somebody with mild haemophilia, that normal rates or small increase, or they may be able to get life assurance with this normal rates or with a small increase in the premium.
Yes.
And then at 1.4, if it's classified as moderate, and an applicant is under 25, the rating will be 8 years, or an increase in premium of 100%.
Yeah.
And over 35 years, 6 years, or an increase of 100%.
Yeah.
And then paragraph 1.7, with severe haemophilia, the rating is likely to be significantly higher. And so over the page, in terms of premium, you say, this means that the rating could be 200 or 300%, depending on the
Yes.
age of the applicant. And then at 1.8, if the haemophilia was very severe, it could be declined or rated at more than 300%. Just to understand, this is your evidence in relation to somebody with haemophilia, but without being infected with hepatitis C or indeed HIV.
Yes, that's right. That's just haemophilia.
And
So
sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, sorry, I'm probably jumping on a bit. I was just going to say that just proves how difficult it is when you add in HIV and or hepatitis C, if those are the ratings for someone just with haemophilia.
And if we turn over the page, you carry out a similar exercise in relation to other financial products. You look there at income protection, first of all, and then you conclude paragraph 2.3, for clients suffering from moderate or severe haemophilia, it's most unlikely they would be able to obtain this protection.
Yes.
And then you look at critical illness cover, and you say, for 3.2, for sufferers of mild or moderate haemophilia, there's likely to be a small rating or no rating at all for this type of insurance. What did you mean there? Do you mean a small rating increase or no rating increase?
A small increase,
Yes.
a small increase or no increase at all.
Yes, and but cover unlikely to be declined for somebody with severe haemophilia. And then paragraph 4.1, you look at the position for those people with haemophilia who have been infected with hepatitis C. And you say the conditions of haemophilia and hepatitis C are treated completely separately by the underwriters in terms of assessing premium. Therefore, if there is, say, a 50% rating for haemophilia and a 50% rating for hepatitis C, the total weight rating will be 100%. And if the cumulative rating exceeds the insurance maximum, which is often 400%, then cover will be declined, whereas cover would have been available if only haemophilia or hepatitis C had been present.
Yes.
So I think you've indicated then that we read this report, do we, to understand that for people with haemophilia and hepatitis C, moderate haemophilia, severe haemophilia, and you classify as well very severe haemophilia, impossible to get life insurance, income protection, or critical illness cover. Is that how we should read this report?
Yes, definitely.
And that also applies, does it, to people with haemophilia and HIV?
Yes. For people with haemophilia and HIV, it was impossible to get them any sort of life assurance or any sort of, income protection for a mortgage. It just wasn't available.
And once you start talking about people with haemophilia who are co-infected with HIV and hepatitis C, presumably those two conditions are also treated separately by underwriters for rating.
Oh, they
terms.
are. The three conditions together would be a decline.
And now this was the position in 2001.
Yes.
Has that remained the position until today, as far as you're aware?
As far as I'm aware, it is the position. Yes. I think there's been a lot in the press which people misunderstand or think that there is life assurance available for people who have solely got HIV and no other health problems. But if you combine HIV with haemophilia or hepatitis C, then in my experience, it would be a decline.
Can I just take you to one more document on this point then, before we go back to the chronology, if I can put it that way. It's HSOC 303443. This is an interview dated the April the 9th, 2007, and it's an interview with you as Independent Financial Advisor for Hemophilia Society and Mcfarland Trust. Do you remember this interview and who conducted it?
No, I don't for some reason, although, no, I don't.
And just before I ask you about what was said in the interview, did you provide or do you provide independent financial advice for members of the Hemophilia Society?
But I did. Well, the Hemophilia Society at the time obviously heard about me and wanted to talk to me and find out what I did. So yes, if anyone from the Hemophilia Society wanted to speak to me, I'd be available to give them advice. So yes.
And did you have any kind of arrangement with the Hemophilia Society about paying that they would pay for their members to see you?
No, I didn't.
So you're asked there about the situation for those infected with HCV and HIV, and I understand that to be members of the population that do not suffer with haemophilia. Is that what you were being asked about?
Yes. Yeah.
And you say there in 2007, in general, if you're infected with HCV and or HIV, there's a denial of access to mortgages and pensions. And then you go on to say, if infected with HCV, it's incredibly difficult to get a mortgage, and if co-infected with HIV, it's virtually impossible. You're there talking about, I think, Mcfarland Trust registrants, but does that apply equally to people who don't have haemophilia?
No, I think, sorry, I don't remember this interview, but I think what it was because the Mcfarland Trust registrants were able to get, a lot of them were on income support. I was able to get them a mortgage, but and they had additional payments from the Mcfarland Trust. But I think for people who weren't members of the Mcfarland Trust or the Eileen Trust, they weren't necessarily in that situation, and sometimes I couldn't get them a mortgage.
So that would be because their financial situation wasn't sufficient for
it was purely based on their financial situation.
So for somebody who's been infected by blood or blood products that doesn't have haemophilia, if their financial situation is such that they can afford a mortgage, mortgages are available.
Yes, they are, yeah.
And then you are asked questions about a pension, and then you're asked questions about life assurance. And you say life assurance is virtually impossible for those infected. Most insurers require with HCV-B to have no liver damage at all in order to comply with their regulations. Yet a large majority of those with HCV will have incurred some liver damage. Again, those who are co-infected are at the biggest disadvantage when attempting to acquire life insurance. So do you understand that for somebody without haemophilia but with hepatitis C, it's almost impossible to get life assurance?
If there's, as is written there, if they've got very little damage to their liver, then there might be a chance of them getting life assurance. And I did have success in a few cases, but they were very few and far between.
And as far as you're aware, does that remain the case now?
Yes. Yes, I've just got a case that I'm doing for someone at the moment, and I'm having problems with it. where I arranged insurance for them. It came to the end of its term, and the person wanted to renew it, and I am having difficulty being able to renew it.
So, going back then to your early days with the Mcfarland Trust.
Yes.
You were contacted by Tudor Williams, who was the social worker at the Mcfarland Trust at the time.
Yes.
Did you have much contact during those early years with the trustees and the employees? So the chair of the trustee at the time was the Reverend Tanner, and the administrator was Wing Commander Williams. Did you have much to do with them?
I met John Williams. My main point of contact was Tudor Williams. I think I may have met the Reverend Tanner once, but not really. I think it was Tudor Williams I was in contact with on a fairly regular basis.
So you weren't attending board meetings or anything of that sort during those years?
No, I wasn't. No.
Can we go back then to the document we were looking at earlier, which is MACF 605_187, which gives us the picture in 1998. So we've looked at the second paragraph there, and then the third paragraph says, as time went on, Tudor Williams asked Susan Daniels to become involved with financial planning more and more frequently due to the number of registrants who had spent their original MFT payments and were left in poor circumstances. Is that an accurate reflection of how matters developed? It broadly, that originally there were a group of people with a capital payment who needed help investing it, and as time went on, the picture changes to people living in great poverty and needing.
Well, I think when I was contacted initially, there were a lot of people living in great poverty, but as time went on, people got into more and more poverty and more debt. People had lost their jobs. They were very, very ill. They didn't really get any proper financial support, in my view, and it was very hard for them.
So what in those years, 1998, when you're being asked to become involved with financial planning more and more, what did that look like? What were you helping people with and advising them to do?
In those years, I would think it was more kind of debt counselling than financial planning. A lot of the registrants had taking away mortgages. A lot of the registrants had significant debts on credit cards and loans. I used to visit them, try and go through all their finances with them, get them to provide me with a schedule of all their debts, and I then used to go away and negotiate with the lenders, the credit card companies, the banks, write to them. I had a lot of success with particularly Lloyds Bank because I just wrote to the chief executive of these organisations. And the chief executive of Lloyds Bank, I used to write and say, why have you lent someone who's on income support, who's ill, £50,000 or whatever it was? And he used to write back to me and say, you're absolutely right, and I'll write the debt off. But that wasn't the case with the majority of lenders. Some did because they realised that they were never going to get the money back, but others I had to negotiate with, get them to accept a much lower sum to settle the debt.
And just going down then this document, the next paragraph says, following a period of negative equity and a flat housing market, things have improved considerably in the past 2 years, and many registrants have been able to move to more appropriate housing with help from Susan Daniels. Does that mean because of the mortgage, or were you giving other assistance as well?
I think that means because of the mortgage scheme that I've been able to arrange.
And then the next paragraph deals with what you've just told us about debt counselling and negotiating with creditors and so on. and rescheduling
Yes.
debt in a way that's acceptable. And then the following paragraph, Susan Daniels also gives advice to families following bereavement and has become very much part of the support network offered to registrants by the Trust. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yes, well, obviously, when someone had died, I used to visit the usually the widow, like I do with any client whose partner had died, help them with things, help them with probate if they needed it, help them to sort out finances, if there are any pensions available, and just generally be a support to them.
You have spoken about visiting. You've mentioned
Yes.
visiting registrants on a number of occasions. Was that very much a
Yes.
key part of how you worked with people?
Yes, I did. When I was with the Mcfarland Trust and indeed the Eileen Trust, I travelled all over the country visiting registrants
Did you visit
and their families.
and did you visit people in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland as
Yes,
well?
yes, I did.
And what was the advantage, in your view, of meeting people face to face rather than dealing with all of this on the telephone?
Well, I think if you meet people face to face, you can develop a personal relationship with somebody. People will tell you things when you're face to face that they won't necessarily tell you during a phone call, and you can empathise with somebody, and you can get some sort of feeling of what they're going through. And I think that's much more difficult to do during a telephone conversation.
The inquiry's heard some evidence, or has received some evidence or some information that suggests that some registrants found, particularly in relation to the Mcfarland Trust, suggestions of visits to meet with them in their own homes as intrusive. Is that a view that was ever expressed to you or that you ever came across?
No, everybody was always very welcoming to me and kind, and I didn't experience any of that feeling whatsoever. I think that what was felt, that people had to sort of that registrants felt they shouldn't have been in a position where they had to ask a charity for small sums of money, for example, to buy a washing machine, or they felt that it was demeaning, and it was demeaning. The government should have actually given them paid proper compensation at the time.
And can I take you to one of your financial advisor report,
Yes.
financial
Yeah.
advisors report that you prepared for the Mcfarland Trust board meeting in October 2004. It's MACF 5019_119. Now, this is a financial advisors report which deals primarily with the question of widows, which is something I want to ask you about a little bit later, but it's probably helpful to look at it now. Since the last trustees meeting, I've made a large number of visits to registrants up and down the country, providing a range of advice, including mortgages, budgeting advice on how to purchase a property, getting back into the workplace, building queries, bankruptcy, and how to write wills. And this, just pausing there, this is at a time when you were not the caseworker at this stage. This was you as an independent financial advisor providing services to.
I think, I was more than an independent financial advisor. I think I was a cross between an independent financial advisor and a social worker, and really someone that someone that the registrants felt they could talk to and confide in.
And you say in the first paragraph that debt cases seem to have diminished, and you hope that's due to the work that you've been doing, and that you've had a few inquiries from the Skipton Fund, and then inquiries about moving to suitable accommodation. But you say here the most common problem is the plight of widows and the fact that they do not have sufficient funds for everyday living. And then the bottom half of that page, you say, pending the Trust establishing a specific policy for widows, it does appear the current trend is to reduce income to a base figure of approximately £100 per month, and this leads to real hardship very vulnerable people forced to seek funds from highly expensive and sometimes unscrupulous loan companies, and then you ask whether or not it's possible to facilitate an interim policy. And then you say at the bottom paragraph there, some older widows who I believe have not been in touch with the trust for many years have contacted me for financial advice. And the main problem is that although they've been careful with their savings, funds have been used over time for everyday living, to compound that situation, because of their role as carers, they receive very little in the way of pension. These are not lazy people, they've just not been paid very much. And then over the page, and I'll come back to those issues, but over the page, at the last paragraph there, you say this: I appreciate all the trustees are very busy, but I do believe that visiting some of these weekends, you're talking about the event, the weekend event you'd been to, and talking to the longer term registrants would be of value. Having spent 12 years talking with the members of the trust, it puts a different complexion on the problems of medically disadvantaged people and their families. So there you're saying really what you've said to us, that meeting people changes the information that you get. Is that right?
Definitely, yes.
And were you concerned that trustees didn't have enough one-to-one, face-to-face contact with registrants at that time?
Yes, I was concerned. I think that a lot of I've got no evidence to support this, but my feeling was that not all of them, some of the trustees did make efforts to meet the registrants and come to the weekends, but I think some of the trustees just attended the board meetings, didn't meet any of the registrants, and if I may expand on that, I think that most of I think probably this goes for trustees generally of charities. They're generally middle class. The majority of them were men, successful men, probably quite well off. I don't think if you're in that position, you can have any understanding of what it's like not to be able to be ill, not to be able to worry about a gas bill arriving and that you might not be able to pay it. The knock-on effects of being ill, being poor, the things that go wrong, that for the average person in the street who's got a job and who's healthy, things go wrong, but you can fix them. But when you've got all these problems on top of that, it's very difficult to be able to fix anything.
And were you concerned that the lack of understanding of how the lack of understanding the trustees may have as a result of their own experience impacted on the decisions that they were making about grants and so on? Yes,
I think that the Mcfarland Trust grant process, not when I was doing it and involved in these things, but I think ultimately it became much too complicated and bureaucratic.
And we see there in October 2004, you making a plea to the trustees, get out there and meet the registrants. Was that taken up? Was that acted on?
I think the trustees did go on some of the weekends. When I was running the Eileen Trust, the trustees did attend all the weekends that I organised. Peter Stevens used to go for the whole weekend and was very good with the registrants, and some of the other registrants took it in turns to go, maybe not for the whole weekend, but they certainly go for a day and a night and have dinner with the registrants, and I think it gave them a much better understanding of what the registrants were going through.
You can take that down now, Shimik. Can we go back then to MACF 605187? That's the 1998 document, sets out the position in 1998. And to the bottom of that first page, which sets out the arrangements for payment of your fees, says there, Susan Dunn is professionally qualified with a financial planning certificate awarded by the Institute of Chartered Insurers, carries her own professional indemnity insurance, So just pausing there, what were your qualifications at that time? Are those correct?
Going back, yes, probably at the time. That's what the qualification was to be a financial advisor. Obviously, as the years have gone on, there are slightly different qualifications, and I've taken all those. So I had qualifications to be a financial advisor. I had mortgage qualifications. I had qualifications in equity release, and I think I had qualifications in long-term care as well.
And I think I've seen reference to you undertaking further training in relation to benefits at some later point. Is that right?
Yes, I did, because obviously, if you're a financial advisor, you do know a certain amount about benefits, but it's not something that you do on an everyday basis. So I did go on a benefits course as well, just so I could widen my knowledge.
And then the next paragraph down, general financial advice for which you charge per client, £100 per client, on the basis that advice is given is guaranteed to be totally disinterested, and for which her only financial return is the fee paid by the Mcfarland Trust. So what does that mean, totally disinterested?
I'm not sure, because I didn't write this, so I don't know. Could it have meant that it was totally independent?
But that's what you understood. You were
Yes.
to give totally independent advice.
Yes, I did. I gave totally independent advice, and people could speak to me in confidence.
And when you were giving that advice, what consideration did you give to the financial constraints of the Mcfarland Trust when giving that advice?
Well, I had to give consideration to the financial constraints, because the Mcfarland Trust never had enough to fund the registrants adequately and do all the things that the registrants needed. But my main priority when giving financial advice to the registrants was to keep them in their house and make sure that if they had a mortgage, the mortgage payments and the rent payments were up to date, and to make them feel that they were in a comfortable's the wrong word, but that to get them in a position where at least they didn't have to worry so much, and that they knew if they had a problem they could phone me up and I'd try and sort it out to the best of my ability.
And then going back to the document, so pay per client on guaranteed to give disinterested independent advice, and for which your only financial return is the fee paid by the Mcfarland Trust. So you were paid by the Mcfarland Trust for the advice you gave to the registrants. Is that right?
Yeah. If it was just a general review, then yes. Yes, obviously, in some cases, if registrants wanted to if registrants did have savings and they wanted to use me as a financial advisor to help them make investments, that was more in the minority of registrants, then obviously they became a client and they were notified what fees I would charge, and that was between me and the registrant and nothing to do with the Mcfarland Trust.
So we see paragraph 2, mortgage assistance. I think that's I think what's described there is a hybrid. So the trust pays a fee for each arrangement that you make for mortgage.
Yes.
And then you also receive a small fee from the Nationwide as a mortgage broker.
That's right. Yeah.
So there's those hybrid arrangements, and then you've described the more traditional independent financial advisor type arrangements with clients.
Yes.
So those three ways in which you received fees.
Yes.
Can I just ask you then about the point, the bit of paragraph 2 which says the trust pays a fee of £275 for each arrangement, in which in most cases is deducted from the moving home grant. Did you understand that the fees that you received, or some of the fees that you received from the Mcfarland Trust, were deducted from grants that the beneficiary would otherwise have been entitled to?
No, I don't think I knew that the mortgage fee was deducted from the moving home grant.
So that's presumably not something you would have discussed with the registrant?
no, that would have been an internal matter for the, excuse me, for the Mcfarland Trust.
And in other documentation that the inquiry has, it seems to suggest that your fees, and indeed fees of other advisors, were met from the beneficiary grant pot, if I can put it like that, rather than the pot of money that was was for running the trust for staff costs and rent and so on. Is that something you were aware of?
No, I didn't have any input into. Obviously, where my fees were paid from was a matter for the charities. So I wasn't aware of that.
You can take that down now, Shimik. How were registrants referred to you when you were at the Mcfarland Trust? Well, you were an independent financial advisor.
Well, when I first became involved with the Mcfarland Trust and with Tudor Williams, he used to just put me in contact with people. So he just either asked me to contact them or give them my telephone number. Later on, because obviously a lot of the registrants knew about me and told other registrants, so if I was contacted directly, I just let the office know and said, someone's contacted me and would like mortgage advice. Is this acceptable for you? And in most cases it was.
And did you consider that the financial and other information provided to you by the registrant was confidential?
In terms of mortgage advice and, financial planning, then yes, I did. But if the charity had sent me to see someone about debts that the charity was going to have to help with the repayment of, then obviously I had to do a report for the charity detailing the person's income and a schedule of their debts.
So, can I break it down in this way? Were you required to give information about a registrant's financial affairs as a matter of course when reporting back to the Mcfarland Trust in order to receive your fees, for example?
No, not in all cases, no. For a mortgage, obviously I would go through the standard process for any mortgage, but I did need a letter from the Mcfarland Trust to the Nationwide. That was part of the process, confirming the benefits that the registrant got, which obviously the Mcfarland Trust would know about. So it was the payments made to the registrant by the Mcfarland Trust, any benefits they got, and the fact that the DWP, if indeed the DWP would pay the interest on a mortgage, that was the case. But if someone wasn't on income support and just asked me to arrange a mortgage for them and told me details of their income, then I had absolutely no reason to report that to the Mcfarland Trust.
And so in order to receive your fees, for example, would you just have had to say to the Mcfarland Trust, I have provided this advice to this registrant, can you pay me, please?
Yes, I would have let them know beforehand, obviously, because if I would have just presented a bill with no, prior warning, they wouldn't have paid me. So I would let them know that, a registrant contacted me for mortgage advice, and was it okay that I, that I did so under the normal basis, which was whatever I charged at the time.
So is this right then?
They would say yes or no.
So is this right then? You would provide information about registrants' finances and and potentially what advice had been given and what discussions had happened, if the registrant was turning to the Mcfarland Trust for some intervention, whether it's assistance with getting a mortgage in terms of information, or a loan, or a grant, or and so on.
Yes, I think I provide information to the Mcfarland Trust. I think that's correct. If the Mcfarland Trust had sent me to visit someone because they had a particular financial issue, and then they were going to need assistance from the Mcfarland Trust with regard to that issue.
And were beneficiaries or were registrants aware that you were sharing that information with the Mcfarland
Yes,
Trust?
they were. I always made it clear that when I went to visit them that I was doing a report for the trust, probably for the trustees, and that, you know, that I was recording the information. And obviously in a debt case, if someone is going to help you pay your debts, it's important for them to have an overall picture of the person's income and level of debt.
And was it ever a condition, insofar as you know, of somebody receiving assistance from the Mcfarland Trust that they had to have advice from you and follow your advice?
No, I think they could have had advice from any financial advisor or any debt counsellor. That they didn't have to come to me.
Can we have? I'm now going to ask you some questions about the picture in October 2005. Can we have up MACF 601_074? So this is a paper on Susan Daniels as MFT case officer, 25th of October 2005. Can we just turn to the last page of that, please, Shumik? And that's, in fact, it seems to be authored by you, in fact, dated the 26th of October 2005. But are we right to understand this is a paper that you presented to the board as a proposal for you to become a case officer at the Mcfarland Trust?
I can't exactly remember, but then yes, I assume it was.
It's slightly. You refer to yourself in the third. You refer to yourself through the paper as Susan Daniels, which is
Yes.
maybe makes it. But that's something you might have done, is it?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Can we go back to the first page, please? You set out there the history, and at the bottom of that last paragraph in that section, you make the point that you've seen more registrants in their homes than any other Mcfarland Trust associate, and developed a close working relationship with a large number of registrants. Often received telephone calls on Saturday evenings, Sunday mornings, and even on bank holidays at 9 o'clock in the evening. Truly a 24/7 service. Is it right that, in fact, you probably visited more registrants in their home than any of the trustees or any of the employees of Mcfarland Trust?
At that time, I would think that was the case, yes.
You then set out what the present situation is, and that as a result of a recent appointment of the head of HSS, you only have had small amounts of work allocated to you. Was that because the work was going elsewhere, or because those services weren't being provided to registrants at that time? Do you know? I mean, you talk about there being a backlog.
I don't think the services were being provided to registrants at that time, and I think from memory, I'm not sure whether someone had left or people were off sick, and that had led to a backlog of work.
And then you set out on the page 3 the role and the draft job specification of the case officer, receiving instructions, feedback, visiting registrants, cooperating with arrangements of events, providing telephone support, regular office visits, attending trustee meetings or other meetings, cooperating with professionals such as social workers, providing a budgeting debt counselling service, attempting to reduce debts, establishing good term relationship with MFT staff, providing pastoral care to the registrants, just a phone call to inquire about their situation, encouraging registrants and widows to retrain and seek employment, advising on training courses, advising on benefits matters, carrying out relevant research on benefits and legal and financial matters, and discussing progress with trustees, chief executives to modify the services needed. How different, well, first of all, was that the role and the job specification as you understood it when you were appointed?
Yes.
And how different, if at all, was that to what you were already doing as an independent financial advisor?
Wasn't different in any way. I was already doing that.
Shamit, you can take that down. When you were formally appointed as the self-employed case officer, did you have to keep in mind when you were with a registrant which hat you were wearing, whether you were wearing your case officer hat or your independent financial advisor hat?
I think if you're a financial advisor, you don't only advise on people's finances, and this goes for the general population as well. You advise on people want to talk to you about every aspect of their lives. So it wasn't difficult for me to do that, and I didn't feel that I had a conflict with my two roles. I was where it was necessary to keep them separate, I did. But no, I didn't feel there was a conflict, and I felt that most people trusted me, and I tried to, keep that confidence.
So when you were, as the case officer for Mcfarland, did you consider yourself to owe a duty to the Mcfarland Trust to ensure that any recommendations that you made about assistance for particular registrants were viable for the Mcfarland Trust? I.e., did you have to consider the recommendation from the perspective of the Mcfarland Trust?
I did consider it from the perspective of the Mcfarland Trust, because obviously there were guidelines, but I considered them purely as guidelines. But if I felt that someone needed additional help that was outside the guidelines, I would put it to the trustees and make an appropriate case for it.
Were you therefore, do you think, sometimes at least in a position of owing a duty both to the registrant acting as their independent financial advisor to give independent advice, independent from the Mcfarland Trust, and at the same time owing a duty to the Mcfarland Trust?
I think I had a duty to be fair to both sides, which I hope I was able to carry out.
So is the answer to that yes, you did have a duty to both sides, but you didn't consider that to be a conflict?
Correct.
What or how did you explain the dual role to the registrants?
Well, they knew that my background was in financial advice, and that was one of the reasons that I think the Mcfarland Trust wanted me to work with them, because most of the people's problems were financial, but they also knew I was there to help them with everyday matters. You know, if they needed help applying for something, a new gas boiler, anything really. If I could help them with it, I would do.
I'm going to ask you some questions now about the position in relation to widows. And we've already seen one of your case reports to the Mcfarland Trust Board where you set out that it's a common problem, a widespread problem. Can you just tell us what it was that you saw and what it was that drew you led you to make reports like that and other reports. There are other examples of
Yes,
you bringing
yes,
this to
yeah.
the board's attention. What is it
Well,
that you
when
saw?
well, when the primary beneficiary had died, the widows got very little support. They'd lost the payments that the beneficiary received from the Mcfarland Trust. They also lost a lot of payments in income support or whatever benefits the primary beneficiary was receiving. And they were in a very poor financial position. I think, as I said in an earlier report, a lot of them had devoted their lives to to being a carer. They'd looked after children. Their employment prospects were poor. A lot of them were very damaged by what they'd been through. And I didn't feel the support that was there for them.
In the paper that we've just looked at, or the proposal for you to be appointed case officer, one of the things you say there is in some cases it's more the depression caused by bereavement and or the very low income that leads to difficulties. You're obviously not a qualified medical practitioner, but were you seeing high levels of mental health difficulties and problems of that nature?
Yes, I was. I obviously I'm not a qualified mental health practitioner, but I have got a lot of experience of dealing with people over the years. And yes, people were very depressed and down, not unnaturally. The other problem, can I just make one more point? The other problem is if somebody dies normally, the person who has died might have a life assurance policy, which would pay back the mortgage or provide additional funds to help with children, and this just wasn't available in this case. And one of the things, I think the government should have underwritten an insurance scheme.
And this community of the bereaved, non-infected community were looking to the Mcfarland Trust, and you said in your view they were not getting sufficient support. Is that right?
No, because the Mcfarland Trust always said that there wasn't sufficient funds to support them.
And so your pleas, as we've seen, to put in place an interim policy and so on, did that bring about any change while you were at the Mcfarland Trust?
No, it didn't. No.
And we've heard a lot about the financial constraints that the Mcfarland Trust were under. Are you able to say whether or not there are things you think they could have done, given that, to improve the situation for widows?
Yes.
What are those things that they could have done to improve the situation?
I think in some cases there was a lack of compassion and empathy. And they did have, I don't think I was aware of it all the time, but they had a lot of money and reserves. They could have used some of those reserves to help the widows.
And is that something that the widows were talking to you about? Did they know about the levels of reserves?
No, I think we're going back years, and I don't think people were aware of that.
I'm going to take you to a couple of documents from August 2005 and then ask you some questions about them. The first one is MACF 40113_002. This is case number 1059. Redecoration to bedrooms, etc., and school uniforms. So, is this what the papers would look like for an application to the NSSC for a grant?
Yes, it would. The registrant wouldn't be named. They just have the number as is shown on the screen.
And there's some papers which we don't need to go to, but Shimit, can we turn to page 6? and this is a report to the trustees on a visit in Birmingham on 3rd of August 2005, which you make to a couple with Mark Simmons, who's their social worker.
Yes.
And it's the first paragraph of this that I want to draw your attention to, that 2 names blanked out, were extremely nervous about my visit. And one of them was visibly trembling when I arrived. It took them a little while to realise that I was there to help them to deal with their problems and not make them worse. And then you go out and set out what their problems are. And we don't need to look at that. But can we go over to the next page, to the bottom, to where it says summary? This family is going to need a lot of help and support to get their debts under control and end up in reasonable financial shape over the next few years. It's going to be difficult to achieve, but not impossible. So, am I right to understand that you were looking at the whole picture? So they may have come to you in relation to a particular concern that they had, a particular grant application, but actually you're looking at the whole picture. Is that how you practiced?
Yes. Yeah, that's what I try to do on every visit. I try to look at the whole picture so I could come back and give an overall picture of the person's circumstances to the trustees, not just one particular issue, whether they needed a washing machine or they had a debt problem. I wanted to try and paint a picture so that the trustees could feel what it was like to be them, if that's not too over emotional.
And did you find that somebody might come to you for a new washing machine, for example, and actually come away with a recommendation to the trustees for something completely different, paying off debts from credit cards, etc.?
I did. I hope that people felt that they could talk to me and open up about things, whether it was personal or whether it was about their finances.
And then it's the last paragraph in this that I wanted to ask you about. I feel deeply saddened after all my years with the Trust and the excellent work it's done in the past that it has now come to the point when registrants inform me that the MFT is the major stress point in my life and are frightened by the prospect of my visit. I just want to show you another document before I ask you questions about that issue. Shimmick, it's MACF 40101_086. And that is another visit in Birmingham in August 2005. Again, don't need to, you said you've spoken to them a number of times over the years, first time you've met in person. And again, we don't need to go through the circumstances. If we can go over to the next page, please. The circumstances which they were presenting with, but it's this. Then some of the comments that were made about their treatment are as follows, and you took notes as verbatim as you can provide.
Yes.
There's a concern that funds were requested for a headstone for the registrant's first wife's grave, and that amounted to less than 2 months of what she would have been receiving had she lived. A complaint about the way that the case was handled by Jude Cohen. They feel the Trust considers them to be out of sight and out of mind. They're now too frightened to ask for anything. The stress caused worsens his condition, and he feels he does in fact get bleeds due to stress. The Trust wastes money on unnecessary bureaucracy, taking money off the people who need it. The Trust don't consider the stress of being a long-time survivor or the guilt he feels regarding the death of his first wife, for which he feels responsible. Finally, they asked me to convey that his condition impacts every aspect of their lives and every decision they make. And you say those comments were made on an unsolicited basis, represent the views of the registrants, and someone with 15 years of experience in dealing with registrants of the Mcfarland Trust. I can only say that this meeting, which lasted nearly 2 hours, made me wonder whether compassion is still an objective of the Trust in dealing with its members. Should a long, hard look be taken at the treatment of registrants and the decisions that are being made on their behalf? Delaying a decision on somebody who is already in a highly stressful condition can be as bad as a poor decision, perhaps worse. So, Shimmick, you can take that document down. The wording that you use in both of those two documents suggest perhaps, or could be read to suggest, that this was a change. You talk about previously excellent work that the Mcfarland Trust has done, and then this. About that time, were you hearing different experiences related by Mcfarland Trust registrants?
Yes, I was.
And both of those documents come from August 2005. Is that about the time that things started to change, as you understood? Or was
yes, when I first joined or worked for the Trust in 1999, I found Tudor Williams to be a very kind and caring person. I also found Anne Hithersay to be very caring. But after she left, the Trust became almost the bureaucracy became much more. They seem to have more and more people working there, more and more committees. It became much harder for the registrants to get grants. I think they were making ill people go through hoops to get, a simple grant. And as I said, yes, I stand by what I said in both those things. I think there was total lack of compassion.
And
not with the junior staff. Let me say that I got on very well with most of the staff, the junior staff who worked in the office, and they were all most of them were very kind to the registrants. So I don't want to say anything, other than that.
Both of those documents are you're not mincing your words in either of those documents.
No.
Can you recall what the response to that was from senior members of staff and from the Trust? From the trustees, sorry.
I don't think I got much of a response. I think they probably felt that I was a rather kind of over-emotional woman and that they didn't do anything about it.
You've spoken to us a little bit about debt and the debt counselling services that you provided to registrants. I'll just take you to a couple of documents just to try and understand with you what the policies were in terms of writing off debts at the Mcfarland Trust when you were there. MACF 5019_210. This is a financial advisors reports for Mcfarland Trust Board meeting on the 19th of April 2004. Can we go to the bottom of the page, please? This is another. The top of the page is another example of you raising concerns about the position of widows. Turning to debt cases, that's the last paragraph. There's been no increase to cases during the period, and I'm having considerable success in writing off debts and agreeing terms with creditors. And then you say this: I do not feel that credit card debts or loans should be paid off by the Trust, except in exceptional circumstances. Can you just tell us a bit about why that was your view?
Well, I obviously wanted to try and get them written off or renegotiated or the debt reduced before they were paid off, and I also didn't want to send out a signal to registrants or that credit card debts would be paid off, because in some cases that just leads to more credit card debts, unfortunately, not only with the registrants, but with just people in general.
So, did you know what was it, or was it clear to you what the Mcfarland Trust policy was as to when it would pay off debts for registrants?
I don't think they had a policy on paying off debts, because I don't think when they set up the charities it was something that they considered. So it just came along on a case-by-case basis. And when I was there, I obviously did my best to get debts written off, or if I couldn't get the whole debt written off, yes, then the Mcfarland Trust would pay back some of the debt. Say I got it reduced by 50% or whatever, they would pay it back.
And you say that was on a case by case basis.
It was on a case by case basis. I think it would have been, to be fair, I think it would have been very difficult having a policy for debts, because each case was quite individual.
We've heard some evidence to suggest that when it came to paying off debts, the Mcfarland Trust was more likely to do that by loaning the money to the registrant to pay off the debt. Was that your experience?
Yes, in some cases they did give the registrant loans, and I think some people, if they were in a position to, and I would obviously go through it with them, some people wanted to make small monthly payments back to the trust if it wasn't, if the debt wasn't too much. But yes.
Are you able to help us with, did you have any concerns at the time about the consistency with which debts were either paid off and loans given to registrants?
No, I don't think I did. No.
So
I don't think I did.
So it was on a case-by-case basis.
When I was there, it was. I suppose it depended on the on how much they were having to pay off. In some cases, it was fairly easy to manage. It might have been a few hundred, but if it was 10,000, then I think the trustees felt that they had to have some sort of letter. I don't think they took a charge on the house for that amount, but they wanted to have some sort of letter that there was an outstanding loan of whatever the amount was.
So can you, when you were working through debt problems with clients, were you reasonably confident in your own mind about what view the trust would take to a particular to writing off a particular debt, i.e. whether or not they would write it off, and if they did, whether or not they would pay it off, and if they did, whether they would do it by grant or loan?
I suppose the smaller cases may have been done by a grant, but if it was a larger case, then it would have been it almost certainly would have been a loan. I think the trustees didn't want to give out the view that they would pay off people's credit card debts and loan debts.
And are you aware of any information coming from the Mcfarland Trust to registrants with that kind of messaging? So by way of policy or guidelines or anything of that sort?
No.
I note the time, sir. I was going to move on to a different topic, onto loans. So it might be convenient to have a break now.
Yes, well, we'll take a break now. We'll come back at 10 to 12.
Right.
I hope that gives you long enough to have a decent break and perhaps a cup of coffee if that's what you'd like to do.
Thank you.
But what we must not do during that time is discuss the evidence that you've given or any evidence you think you may yet be asked to give with anyone, whoever that anyone is. Talk about anything else you like, but not about your evidence.
Okay, thank
you. See
you.
you back at 10 to 12.
10 to 12, thanks.